You show up early. You stay late, you are the perfect employee. You believe that your loyalty is a shield. But what happens when the company restructuring email hits your inbox? Tonight, we explore the darkest lesson from the Bible, the tragedy of Job. We reveal the terrifying psychological truth that doing everything right is never enough to save you. Welcome to The Debate. Today, we are looking at the biblical book of Job, not as a piece of ancient theology, but as a really devastating psychological allegory for the modern hyper-capitalist workplace.
Yeah, it's a completely different lens.
Exactly. We're dissecting a profoundly uncomfortable question raised by the narrative. Does the story of Job validate a necessary human belief in, meritocracy and perseverance? Or does it expose corporate loyalty as a dangerous, exploitable lie? I take the position that society desperately needs this illusion of meritocracy to function at all, and that Job's ultimate perseverance through his suffering proves that hard work and character must mean something if we are to survive.
And I take the opposing view. The modern corporate translation of Job's eventual reward is just, it's a complete fabrication. The capitalist system is an inherently indifferent machine, and believing in meritocracy isn't just naive, it is a psychological trap that sets loyal workers up for profound, life-altering existential trauma.
So to really ground my position here, we have to look at the baseline function of what psychologists call the just world fallacy.
Right.
It's this deeply ingrained belief that actions have predictable moral consequences. So in the biblical text, Job is presented as a deeply righteous, loyal, and prosperous man. He is the archetype of the person who does everything right.
The ultimate rule follower.
Yes, exactly. He obeys every rule. He tends to his community. He is the ultimate good employee in the cosmic sense. And our entire modern civilization is built on the premise that Job's initial behavior leads directly to safety.
But, that premise is exactly what the story dismantles.
Well, it tests it, certainly, but we teach our children this cause and effect structure because it is strictly required for social order. If you study hard, work late, and, demonstrate loyalty to the institution, you will be protected.
Mm-hmm.
We require this mental framework for personal motivation. Think about it. If we collectively abandon the belief that doing everything right provides a degree of safety, society rapidly collapses into total nihilism. Why would anyone innovate? Why cooperate?
Right.
Why sacrifice for a larger goal? Job's unwavering character, even as his wealth, his health, and his children are systematically stripped away, is the ultimate test of human resilience. The illusion of meritocracy, this belief that our efforts actually matter, is a structural necessity to build a cohesive, productive society.
The problem with treating that illusion as a structural necessity, though, is the sheer collateral damage it leaves in its wake.
How so?
Well, when you look at this through a sociological lens, the story of Job is a devastating critique of that exact meritocratic optimism. In the corporate world, human loyalty is not a moral virtue that the system recognizes. It is merely an exploitable resource.
Wait, you don't think companies value loyalty?
I think they consume it. Look at the mechanics of the ancient text. God allows Satan to test Job by systematically destroying his life, entirely unprovoked. In our modern context, the corporate gods allow market forces, indifferent algorithms, and management consultants to do the exact same thing to the loyal worker.
Okay, but...
No, think about it. An employee can dedicate decades to a company. They can sacrifice their physical health, miss every single family dinner, and essentially destroy their personal relationships just to be that perfect, good employee. And then they are erased in an instant because a restructuring algorithm determined their division was, 3% too expensive? The system is fundamentally indifferent to individual morality. You are asking people to put their absolute faith in an entity that physically lacks the capacity to care for them.
I see why you think that. But let me give you a different perspective on the function of that suffering and the nature of the system itself. You describe market forces and restructuring as a kind of senseless erasure.
Because they are.
But if we look at human history, and indeed at the arc of a long career, hardship is often the very mechanism through which character and resilience are forged.
Forged? You're assuming the system is trying to build something out of you.
I'm arguing that the friction forces adaptation, regardless of the system's intent. Think of the biblical story. Satan's role is to test Job's faith, to act as the crucible. In the modern equivalent, market crashes, industry disruptions, and painful layoffs act as modern crucibles.
I mean, that's a tough sell.
But the struggle itself generates meaning. When an individual navigates the brutal volatility of the corporate landscape without losing their integrity, they are demonstrating a profound human triumph. We cannot simply dismiss all systemic hardship as meaningless suffering. It forces us to grow.
I have to push back heavily on this romanticization of suffering. It fundamentally misinterprets the nature of the trauma described in the text.
How does it misinterpret it?
Because Job does not suffer because he needs to learn a lesson. He doesn't suffer because his character requires, forging. The text is incredibly explicit about this. Job suffers despite his absolute innocence. He was already perfect. The destruction of his life serves zero pedagogical value for him.
But he still comes out the other side.
Wait, hold on. Let's stay with the nature of the destruction first. This is where the parallel to the modern corporate system is most terrifying. You called it a crucible earlier.
Yes.
A crucible implies a blacksmith, right? Someone intentionally applying heat to make you stronger. But algorithms aren't blacksmiths. They are weather systems.
Weather systems. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, when a hurricane levels a coastal town, it doesn't purposefully leave the houses of the morally righteous standing while knocking down the houses of criminals. It just obeys the laws of thermodynamics. It is pure, unadulterated indifference.
Okay.
The corporate machine operates the exact same way. When a company restructures and eliminates 10,000 jobs overnight, the spreadsheet doesn't factor in who worked over the weekend or who was paying for their mother's chemotherapy. It is just thermodynamics of capital. Therefore, the suffering is completely stripped of the meaning you are trying to assign to it. It is not a crucible.
So you view it purely as a destructive force?
It is a force of nature that we have mistakenly personified. When we tell laid-off workers that their termination is a test of character or an opportunity for growth, we are engaging on a really toxic form of gaslighting. We are absolving the system of its cruelty by pretending the hurricane was trying to teach them a lesson.
But consider the psychological alternative. If we accept your premise that the system is just a blind, unfeeling hurricane, what does that do to a human mind that desperately wants to believe otherwise?
It sobers it up.
Does it? If we strip away the meaning of the struggle, how does anyone function?
They function by seeing reality clearly.
But do they, really? The modern workplace requires massive amounts of cooperation, deferred gratification, and trust. You have to believe that the hours you put in today will pay off a promotion or, security tomorrow. If every worker operated under the constant, agonizing assumption that their efforts meant absolutely nothing and they could be discarded tomorrow without cause, the psychological anxiety would completely paralyze them.
So you're saying the delusion is a feature, not a bug?
Yes, exactly. From an evolutionary psychology standpoint, the brain needs to establish predictable patterns just to reduce stress. The belief that if I do A, B will happen is a necessary protective mechanism.
Even if it's false?
Even if it's mostly false, it creates a localized sense of control in an otherwise chaotic universe. Even if the macro system, your corporate hurricane, is indifferent, the micro belief allows the individual to get out of bed, to produce, to innovate, and to build a life. The myth of the good employee is what allows us to navigate the inherent risks of capitalism without succumbing to despair.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why that localized sense of control is exactly the mechanism of destruction. The belief itself is what causes the crushing psychological trauma described by modern psychologists.
How does believing you have control cause the trauma?
Because it dictates how much of yourself you give away. Let's look at the mechanics of this. Because workers genuinely believe the myth that their loyalty is a shield, they overinvest. They offer up sacrifices on the altar of the corporation. Let's make this real for a second.
Sure.
Picture a mid-level regional director. He's 45. He's missed his daughter's piano recitals. He's worked through vacations. He has high blood pressure. He tied his entire identity, his self-worth, and his moral standing to his employment status. He believes he has entered into a sacred covenant with his employer.
Right. A covenant of mutual protection.
Right. So what happens when he gets called into a sudden 15-minute Zoom meeting with HR and 10 minutes later he's locked out of his email? What happens when he's putting his coffee mug and that frames picture of the family vacation he cut short into a cardboard box? It is not just a loss of income. It is an epistemological collapse.
Let's define that term for the listener, because epistemological collapse sounds highly academic, but the scenario you just painted is incredibly visceral.
Yeah, it just means the entire framework of how you understand reality just shatters. Your epistemology is how you know what is true. For this manager, his fundamental formula for how the universe works, the whole "if I am good and loyal, I am safe" idea, has just been proven completely false.
Wow.
The existential trauma is magnified tenfold specifically because the individual believed their morality and effort would protect them. They ask, "What did I do wrong?" when the terrifying reality is that they did everything right.
And that echoes Job perfectly. Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, they show up and essentially victim blame him. They sit down and say, "Job, you must have sinned. God is just, so you must have done something wrong."
Yes, it's the ancient equivalent of modern hustle culture,
That's a great way to put it.
right? When someone gets laid off today, LinkedIn influencers do the exact same thing. They say, "Oh, you didn't network enough, you didn't upskill." Bystanders need to believe the victim did something wrong. Otherwise, the bystanders have to admit that they aren't safe either.
That's a fascinating parallel. The bystanders enforce the meritocratic myth because their own sanity depends on it.
Exactly. And the trauma of Job is the sudden realization that the rules you followed so meticulously were entirely unilateral and subject to change without notice. If that manager had operated with a clear-eyed understanding of the system's indifference from the start, he would have maintained boundaries. He would have protected his health. He would have gone to the piano recital. The myth doesn't protect him. It disarms him right before the slaughter.
Your framing of the trauma is undeniably powerful. The epistemological collapse is a very real phenomenon in the modern economy, but I think you are selectively reading the narrative to ignore the crucial resolution.
You mean the ending?
Yes, the ending. In the biblical account, the story does not end with Job sitting in the ashes, bereft of everything, cursing the chaotic universe. Job eventually gets his rewards back. In fact, he receives double what he lost. He perseveres, he refuses to surrender his integrity, and ultimately the cosmic balance is restored.
I knew we would get here.
We have to. Because if we translate this back into our economic metaphor, it suggests a totally different conclusion. It tells us that while the hyper-capitalist system is incredibly volatile and capable of inflicting severe unmerited pain, like your corporate hurricane, extreme perseverance through that economic storm ultimately leads to restoration.
You genuinely believe the corporate market restores what it takes?
I believe the meritocracy bends, sometimes to a terrifying degree, but it does not completely break. The loyal worker who gets laid off, who suffers that profound dislocation and epistemological collapse you described, often takes that resilience, reinvents themselves, and eventually finds a new path to prosperity. They start a new business, they pivot. The ultimate reward for character and hard work does exist in the long run. The system corrects itself.
That is perhaps the most dangerous translation of all because it relies on a systemic lie. In the modern corporate economy, the reward at the end of Job's suffering simply does not exist as a guaranteed outcome.
But it can exist.
Barely. The conclusion of the book of Job, where the protagonist miraculously has his wealth and family replaced, is a neat theological bow tied onto a narrative of profound chaos. But in reality, the hyper-capitalist machine does not have a mechanism for divine restoration.
It has market corrections. It has new opportunities.
Opportunities don't replace what was extracted. Think about the battery life of a human being. The system extracts your energy, your time, and your youth. You can do absolutely everything right, lose everything to an algorithm, and receive zero cosmic compensation.
Well,
The 55-year-old worker who sacrifices his health and suffers a stress-induced heart attack does not magically get a second healthier body from the corporation the way Job gets new livestock. The worker who misses their child's formative years because they were traveling for sales does not get those years returned to them with interest.
So you view the human worker purely as a consumable battery.
That is how the system views them. The system extracts the resource, and when the resource is depleted, it is discarded. Period. To tell workers that their perseverance will eventually force an indifferent system to reward them is to double down on the very illusion that caused their trauma in the first place. There is no moral arc to the algorithm.
It is deeply unsettling to confront the idea that the mechanism we rely on for order might not have a moral center at all. What you are describing is a landscape utterly devoid of an overarching sense of justice. We want to believe the invisible hand of the market is guided by fairness, but you're arguing it's just grasping for efficiency.
It is solely grasping for efficiency. And when we look closely at the architecture of the modern corporate world, the parallels to this ancient text are undeniable. It strips away the comforting lies we tell ourselves about the nature of our daily labor.
It forces us to acknowledge a chilling reality. Because when you strip away the corporate branding, the mission statements, and the HR rhetoric about, being a family, you are left with the cold mechanics of capital.
Precisely. The corporate entity you sacrifice your life for possesses no soul. It has no memory of your decades of late nights. It keeps no record of the stress you absorbed to meet a quarterly deadline. And crucially, it owes absolutely no loyalty to you.
And that, I think, is the terrifying convergence of our two perspectives tonight. Despite our deep disagreement on the utility of the meritocratic belief, whether it's a necessary shield or a toxic trap, we arrive at this horrifying shared truth. We are all Job.
Yeah, we really are.
We are sitting in our cubicles, logged into our networks, attending our endless meetings, completely convinced that our compliance and our excellence form a protective barrier around our lives.
Exactly. We sit there performing our righteousness, waiting for an economic storm that we did not cause, that we cannot control, and that has the power to wipe out everything we built in a fraction of a second. It is the ultimate vulnerability masked as security.
So as we begin to draw our analysis to a close, it's vital to summarize the fundamental divide in our perspectives, even in the shadow of that shared realization. My philosophical stance remains that despite acknowledging the terrifying algorithmic indifference of the hyper-capitalist system, the human commitment to perseverance is still paramount.
Even if it guarantees nothing?
Especially because it guarantees nothing. The pursuit of meaning through hard work, the dedication to an ethical standard of labor, and the resilience to weather unmerited suffering remain a necessary and noble endeavor. We may be operating within an indifferent machine, yes. The hurricane may come, but our personal commitment to excellence and our refusal to surrender to nihilism is what allows us to maintain our humanity in the face of the storm. The illusion of a moral arc, whether guaranteed or not, is the framework that sustains our society.
And my sociological stance requires us to demand intellectual honesty about the systems we inhabit. We must abandon the meritocratic myth precisely to protect ourselves from it. Acknowledging that the system is indifferent is not nihilism. It is basic self-preservation.
Right.
It is the only way to establish healthy boundaries. It's the only way to value our physical health and our family relationships above our productivity metrics. We have to insulate ourselves from the psychological devastation of being inevitably discarded. We simply cannot survive the corporate crucible if we are operating under the delusion that it loves us back.
It is clear that we will continue to disagree over whether the illusion of meritocracy is a necessary survival tool that fosters resilience or a toxic trap that ensures our ultimate devastation. Yet our point of convergence remains absolute. The hyper-capitalist system, much like the cosmos, depicted in the tragedy of Job, is inherently indifferent to individual morality. A good employee is no more protected from a market crash than a righteous man is protected from a tempest.
It is a profound realization, and it fundamentally alters how we view our daily commute, our overflowing inboxes, and our relationship to our own labor.
It truly is. It leaves us reflecting on the haunting, enduring power of the biblical text. It is remarkable how a narrative thousands of years old so perfectly captures the precise existential dread of the modern economy. It suggests that the tension between human morality and chaotic, indifferent power structures is a fundamental, unchanging part of the human condition. There is so much more to unpack in the narrative of Job, and we encourage everyone to revisit it through this psychological lens.
Look down at your employee ID badge.
It is not a shield. It is just a number in a spreadsheet. The storm is coming, and your loyalty cannot stop it.